Hello everyone, welcome back to Too Sweet MTG and welcome to another Commander video. This one's going to be a little bit different to some of the other deck techs that we've done, primarily because this is one I have actually gone out and built myself. Recently, I have taken apart all of my Commander decks. By God, I have so many empty boxes full of sleeves just lying around my room right now. The reason I did this is so that I can start building new and cool Commander decks. The aim for me is to try and build a new Commander every single week, or at least every time I meet up and play Commander, so I can bring something new and cool along. So this week I built Megatron Tyrant. It is 3 red, white, and a black for a 7/5 legendary artifact creature robot. It has your opponents can't cast spells during combat, and at the beginning of your post-combat main phase, you may convert Megatron. If you do, add a colourless for each 1 life your opponents have lost this turn. It also importantly has more than meets the eye for 1 red, white, and a black, which means you can cast it for its converted side. The converted side is Megatron Destructive Force. It is a 4/5 legendary artifact vehicle with living metal. This means that on your turn, this vehicle is also a creature. So basically on your turn it's automatically crewed, but you can't crew it on anyone else's turn. It has whenever Megatron attacks, you may sacrifice another artifact. When you do, Megatron deals damage equal to the sacrificed artifact's mana value to target creature. If excess damage would be dealt to that creature this way, instead that damage is dealt to that creature's controller and you convert Megatron. So why did I build this? If I'm honest, I kind of wanted to build one of the Transformers cards, and Megatron was one of the ones that I opened. It's a nice 3-color one, so I thought it could do some cool things, and I could jam some cool cards into it. So we'll jump over to Tapped Out now, and I'll show you my list. A couple of bits before we kind of actually go through this. Something people might have noticed from the channel is I don't normally like giving full deck lists for full Commander decks. The reason for this is that everyone's budget, everyone's playstyle is different. What I've done with this is I have still broken it down into the elements that I would normally use for a full deck tech. Like we have our ramp section, we have our recursion, we have our card draw, we have our interactions, our win cons, cheat effects, like that kind of thing. Like we have all of our sections. One thing with taking apart all my Commander collection is that it means I have a lot of one-ofs of really good cards. So if there's cards in here that don't suit your budget or don't suit your playstyle, you can still find ones to replace them if they do a similar role in the deck. So the best place to probably start with this is what is the deck actually trying to do? What the deck's trying to do is to cheat big artifacts into play and then sack them to Megatron, sack them to the backside of Megatron to deal damage to a small creature, and then that damage will then trample over and go to someone's face. So basically we're trying to either abuse enter the battlefield effects because we're just going to be sacking them straight away, so we've already got our value out of them, or we're going to be trying to abuse death triggers to try and get some value that way. A lot of those big artifacts I want to be on creatures, so it kind of works with both sides of Megatron. The backside, you can basically fling them at an opponent's creature and then trample over for some damage, or on the front side, if they just swing through for combat damage, that will be more life that your opponent has lost, so you'll make more colourless mana. That's why in this deck there's quite a big cheat effect section and also quite a lot of recursion. That should hopefully make a bit more sense when we kind of go through all the individual sections of the deck. I think it's probably best if we start with our card draw section, as you'll kind of see a bit of a pattern in what I was trying to do with the deck. We have things like Chromatic Star. It's an artifact that wants to go to the graveyard. When you do, you draw a card. It's a nice bit of filtering, that kind of thing. But then you get to things like Faithless Looting, or Key to the City, or Smuggler's Copter, or Thrilling Discovery. These are cards that you have to discard cards to then draw some more cards. See, me, I love a graveyard deck. So what the aim with this is to draw cards while also filling up our graveyard, so that we can then reanimate things back into play. It's just another way of cheating things into play, basically. In a heavy artifact deck like this, I also thought Loshin Clockwork Scholar would do a lot of work, and it was actually pretty good. So with these lootings that we kind of got in these kind of bits of card draw, this kind of is a reason why the Recursion package is much bigger than a lot of other decks. There is definitely some crossover in some of these sections, so things like Duretti is also a bit of card draw, or some card selection, sorry, while also being able to sacrifice artifacts and bring things back from the graveyard. That was really, really cool. And because remember, the backside of Megatron is a sacrifice outlet of a sort for artifacts, things like Junk Diver, or Scrap Trawler, or Mere Retriever. These are all artifacts that when they go to the graveyard let you bring something else back to your hand, meaning you just get value again and again, that kind of thing. And because of all the big artifacts that we'll get to in a little bit, something like Wake the Past actually did a ton of work. Like obviously best case scenario, you're getting back a load of your big dumb artifact creatures, but even just getting things like your Chromatic Stars back, or your Ica Wellsprings that you already sacked earlier, just to get a bit more card draw, a bit more kind of late game gas, is really, really nice. I really actually liked Wake the Past in this list. I thought it was very good. One card I also hadn't played with before until this deck is Mishra, Tamer of Makfwawa. This card was actually really, really good. Just giving all your artifacts unearth. It's not just artifact creatures, it's all artifacts have unearth. That was actually really, really good. In this deck, there's a lot of utility artifacts, all that kind of stuff. I was actually really impressed by this card. The 5 mana wasn't too much. I actually thought this was really good. If I'm honest, things like Animate Dead and Victimize were possibly a little bit greedy. Maybe we could have shaved those for some more card draw or some more looting effects. I think that would have been fair. And if I'm honest, I didn't see Whip of Erebos in the games that I played with this deck, but I just like it. It's a good, solid artifact. Just giving your creatures lifelink is actually very relevant when you're trying to cheat big things into play. Sometimes things don't go to plan, and this can just stabilize you with one swing of one big creature. I do really like Whip of Erebos. If I'm honest, I think Theldon of the Third Path could actually just be in the cheat effects section, because that's kind of what it's doing. We'll move over to that section now, because this is another way of just getting things into play before you're meant to. That's kind of what the Recursion does in combination with the card draw, but the cheat effects is where this kind of really goes off. So firstly, a card like Cursed Mirror isn't too pricey. At its base level, it's a mana rock, but it can also come down as a copy of any creature on the battlefield. So in this deck, where we're having, again, a load of big enter the battlefield effects, that kind of thing, this is really, really solid. Fable of the Mirror Breaker, I'll be honest, it's just a good card. It does a little bit of everything that you want. It makes you some treasure with the Shaman token. It does the looting thing as well, so we get a bit of selection, that kind of thing. We put some stuff into the graveyard. And then the backside can just double up one of our big creatures that we can sack to Megatron instead of the creature itself. So we can sack the token rather than the creature. Same thing with Jaxis. It's just another way of putting a card into the graveyard while also getting a token of something that we have in play. Mimic Vat is always solid in these kind of decks where we can sack the big thing to Megatron and then put a copy of it under Mimic Vat. That is always quite good. And then we just have some solid sneak things into play things with Perforos, Bronze-Blooded. Really solid in this deck, as most of the big things we're cheating into play are artifacts, so that is really good. And then Sneak Attack is one of my favourite cards in all of Magic. When I saw Megatron, I immediately thought Sneak Attack, so it's kind of one of the reasons that I was drawn to it and put the deck together. So hopefully with that you can kind of see what the deck is trying to do. Stick artifacts into the graveyard, either recur them or cheat them into play, so that we can then do some cool stuff with Megatron. So cheating the big artifacts into play is one way of getting them into play. The other way is the kind of tried and true, a bit more boring, just hard casting them. That's why the ramp section on this is really hefty. 15, in hindsight, is way too much, if I'm honest with you. I think when I was putting this together, I was kind of counting Slowbold as like a sacrifice thing. That didn't really work for that. It's a good card, but it's basically ramp. If I was building this again, this would be probably about 12 cards. I think I definitely would rather have some ramp, or maybe some other big payoffs, than having 15 bits of ramp. I think this is definitely a bit too much in hindsight. I think 12 is probably a good number in this deck. It's still quite a lot, but it does mean that you can actually go and actually hard cast your big stuff. So that's, I think, one change I would definitely make. For interaction, again, we're kind of keeping stuff as thematic as possible. Yes, we did run Path to Exile, we ran Toxic Deluge, we ran Swords to Plowshares, we ran Generous Gift, just because they are good, solid, and they're quite easy to cast. Where you kind of get a bit more thematic, you get Chaos Defiler. This is a house of a card. If you're playing any kind of red-black artifact deck, play this card. It is fantastic. We have Duplicant, just the exile effect is really, really good. You have Meteor Golem, which getting rid of any non-land permanent is just really, really solid. And again, remember you have these creatures. You can double these up with things like Cursed Mirror, or Fable of the Mirror Breaker, or Mimic Vat especially. So you're going to get these effects again and again. That can be really oppressive and kind of really help keep the board in check. Unfortunately, I didn't get into play Portal of Phyrexia. I've only really played this actually in pre-release. It was very, very good in pre-release. I'm assuming it's going to be good in Commander. Hopefully we can get it out in another deck sometime soon and see how good it actually is in Commander. Before we move on to our win cons, we'll go over some protection that I was running. Lightning Grease, solid in this deck as it is in any. I thought the haste could be quite good just so we can get the backside of this attacking as quickly as possible. And Malakir Rebirth, I really like this card. It's basically another free land that you can also use when one of your creatures dies. So we could sack one of our big creatures to Megatron, to the backside of Megatron, it will deal the damage. Then with Malakir Rebirth, you just bring it straight back into play, ready to do again. That is really, really cool. I really like Malakir Rebirth in any deck that can run it, basically. So let's move over to some win cons now. I think the best place to start with this is some big dumb creatures that we're going to be sacking to the backside of Megatron. So some good things to sacrifice are big artifacts like Triplicate Titan, which is a house of a card, and the always classic Wormcoil Engine. These both definitely do what you want them to do. They come in, they're big creatures, we can sack them, and then but they leave things behind them as well. That's pretty solid, we like that. And also, if you're still using the front side of Megatron, these will get through for a lot of damage. Like, people don't want to be blocking a Death Touch lifelinker, and likewise, Triplicate Titan has flying, so it's even harder to block. Some other big artifacts that I did well with were something like Mere Battlesphere. This is more of an ETB effect. Same with Combustible Gearhulk. Again, that could kind of be in the card draw section. And then there's also Metalwork Colossus, which I didn't actually see in the games I played, but I could imagine it just being really, really good just because there's plenty of stuff. You have your chromatic stars, you have your Ichor Wellsprings that want to be sacrificed. Perfect for a metalwork classes to bring it back to your hand after you've already sacked it to Megatron to deal something some damage and an opponent some damage as well. Some other ways of buffing up that backside of Megatron, like the big cannon side, is something like Basilisk Collar. This part I'm not sure if it's a bit cute or not, because having some equipment to give Megatron the Destructive Force some cool abilities, you will have to re-equip them every turn because they will fall off because it's not a creature when it's not your turn. But giving it Death Touch means that you only need to ping a creature for 1 damage, it'll kill that creature, then the rest will trample over to your opponents. That I still think is worth it, as it is also just an equip 2. You can do that. It's basically a removal spell then. The other one that, again, I didn't get to see in the game, could be a little bit too cute, is Grafted Exoskeleton and try and kill some people with Infect. This way, if you can get through with it being unblocked and you fling a Triplicate Titan or Wormcoil Engine at someone, they're basically going to die then. So this could be a little cute, especially as I'm not entirely sure how this works when it flips, what the rules are with it transforming. I'm assuming it would still be equipped. Actually, now I'm looking at it, this is actually not that great. I'm kind of glad I didn't see this, because I've just realized that if this is equipped to Megatron, at the end of turn, it will stop being a creature, so will fall off and unattached. So don't play Grafted Exoskeleton in this deck. It's very cute, and it could probably just going to end up killing your Megatron, so we don't like that. That is not good. Another card I put in the win conditions is Alabu Ancient Witness. Giving all the artifact creatures that we have haste, we like that, especially if we're reanimating stuff. It means they can hit the turn they come in. That is really, really good. And then the bottom ability is kind of like another copy of the backside of Megatron. It's dealing damage when we're attacking with artifacts. And also the scry for the number of tapped artifacts could be really nice. Just gives you that extra bit of card selection, just kind of fix the top of your deck a little bit. It is quite a cool card. Some ways to work with the front side of Megatron, the ability of, at the beginning of your post-combat main phase, you may convert Megatron. If you do add a colorless for each 1 life your opponent has lost this turn, basically, we're going to buff up that damage and have more ways of dealing it with things like Dictate of the Twin Gods, Furnace of Wrath, and Gratuitous Violence. Basically, just ways of making your permanents deal double damage. That is quite good. It just means you're going to be making a load more mana. Another card that does something similar in that is Descent of Avernus, which is an enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, put 2 Descent counters onto it. Then each player creates X treasure tokens, and it deals X damage to each player, where X is the number of Descent counters on it. So this is just guaranteeing you damage to everyone. Yes, everyone will make treasures, but we're an artifact sacrifice deck. We're going to make the most use out of this of anyone. So I think Descent of Avernus is a very cool card in this kind of build. It's just guaranteeing you mana, basically. And then one last little win con, we have Pier's Revolution. Whenever a non-token artifact is put into your graveyard from the battlefield, return that card to your hand unless target opponent has Pier's Revolution, deal 3 damage to him or her. Basically, this just reads, whenever an artifact goes to your graveyard, someone takes 3 damage. They should not be giving you the stuff back because the deck is built around getting it back, kind of like scrapping it, bringing it back, that kind of thing. Pier's Revolution is just an additional way of dealing 3 damage. It's pretty solid. So, utility lands, because it's a 3-colored deck that doesn't have green, I only really went with Urza's Saga. We have 5 hits, we have Basilisk Collar, which again, as I said, it's one neat and cool. Nihil Spellbomb, being able to nerf a graveyard, I think was cool. Bit of card draw, and just some ramp. Meaning that, yeah, it's an artifact deck, we'll play Urza's Saga. I think it's fine. And the mana base, these are the best things that I had available. If I'm honest, this is actually quite a tuned mana base. Again, this is the benefit of playing Commander for 10 years and then taking all your decks apart. It means that you have a lot of bits to kind of build with. So that's pretty cool. So unlike a lot of deck techs, I can actually kind of tell you how the deck ran because I played it. The whole point of this was to build it and play it. So how did it actually do? It did alright. It held its own in some relatively competitive games. I don't think this would do well in a super combo-y meta. If I was to kind of rank it out of 10, I think this build of it, which is pretty optimized, I would say. There's some good cards in here. It's probably about a 6 out of 10, I would say. It's good power level, will compete. In terms of changes I would definitely make, the main thing I noticed with this build is that I made a lot more colorless mana off of Megatron's front side than I thought I would. So I would definitely consider cutting, as I said, go down to 12 bits of ramp and just add a couple more big, beefy creatures, if I'm honest with you. I think that's definitely a way to go. When you have things like Mishra and you have Goblin World and just ways of getting them back. Like, I had plenty ways of getting these creatures back from the graveyard. That was all fine. That wasn't the issue. If anything, I wanted more of them. So that's definitely something I think I would consider. Actually, now I think about it, some other improvements that I'd probably add to this is just some ways of either getting Megatron through for some damage, maybe like the passageway that makes it unblockable, or just ways of it not taking damage when it attacks, because The backside of this is when it attacks. It doesn't actually have to deal damage to do the flingy thing. The front side does, but just having ways of protecting your attacking creatures, I think, could be really good in this deck. So something like Dolem's Gate or Iroas, God of Victory, I think it is. I think those two could be pretty solid as just ways of protecting your board so they don't take combat damage. I think that could be quite a cool include. The other card I thought that could go in is something like Horizon Stone. That way you don't lose the unspent mana. It goes into colorless mana, so you can cast it next turn. That could be quite good. Also, it is a 5 mana artifact that, worst case scenario, you can sacrifice to Megatron Destructive Force. That could also work. I think to also actually make the backside a little bit better, potentially giving your opponent some 1/1s. I did find a couple of times that my opponents only had big creatures. So maybe like the land that taps for, like, is one of the orchards, taps for a mana of any color and gives your opponent a 1/1. That could be quite good. Does the Trojan Horse, I wonder, does that give opponent 1/1s, that kind of thing? That could be an interesting way of going with it, just so you're giving them targets for you to shoot, to really make the most of the damage from the backside of Megatron trampling over, basically. But yeah, all in all, I actually quite enjoyed this deck. I quite enjoyed Megatron. It was fun. As I said, if you're in a super competitive play group, it'll do some cool stuff. You probably definitely need to run some more tutors if you really want to increase the power level of this. Like, you want to be like running gambles, things that could put stuff into the graveyard. You're going to be running Blightsteel, which I know shuffles in, but like you can still sneak attack it in to kill someone out of nowhere. That kind of stuff. If you're in that kind of build where you want to be more competitive. But for me and the power level I really enjoyed this. If I wasn't specifically taking decks apart every week, this is one I would consider keeping around for a couple of months and seeing how I could improve it and tune it up. So in terms of the games that I played with this, how did they go? So I don't believe I won any of the games I played with this, but I definitely put up a good showing. I'm not 100% how the games ended because I was playing in the pub, so it's safe to assume not the tightest of plays from my end on that part. But there were some cool things, like there was a couple of points where I thought I was about to do some really powerful stuff. Like I had Megatron, I had a Mimic Vat with a Wormcoil engine underneath it. I'm like, okay, let's go, we're about to pop off with this. And then one opponent stole the Mimic Vat. That kind of sucked and definitely kind of pushed me back a couple of turns. But at no point did I feel out of the game. At every point I thought I was doing cool stuff. I had lots of decisions, like what do I sacrifice, what do I do, that kind of thing. In that respect, it was very, very cool. Cool, so thank you all very much for watching. There will be a link down to my deck list in the description below. Let me know what you think. If you've built Megatron, what's been your experience with it? Or if you're thinking of building it, what do you like in my list? What would you add? How would you make the deck your own? Again, I've been playing Commander for quite a while now. My collection is quite good. I'm able to put this deck together. You don't need to run expensive cards to make it impactful. If you want to build this yourself on a budget, go with the general numbers that I have. So go with like 10 bits of recursion, have like 6 cheat effects, that kind of thing. There's definitely budget options out there for you. The main change to my list is cut a bit of ramp and add a bit more beef. You'll have a ton of fun. Actually thinking about it, I will add some budget options to the link in the description below to the actual deck list. Have a look at the maybe board. There'll be some budget replacements for some of the more expensive cards in there. But until next time, please like, share and subscribe, all that good stuff, and I'll see you soon. Goodbye.